Okay, so another day, and what I'm doing, I'll cut in some other steps, but quilt top is done. Realized it was wrinkled, so I pressed it. Before you put pieces together, before you cut things out, before you start to sew, you want to make sure things are pressed well. And this quilt, I tried to press towards the darker pieces most of the time. Occasionally when I did that, it meant that as I joined squares together, there's an extra fold. But this is just a quilt, a quick one. It's not intended to be perfect. It's just intended to be a little bit of extra warmth. So I'm not too worried about which direction things went. I'm not too worried about things being a little bit thicker. This is fairly thin fabric anyway. I have my batting here. I have my backing here, which is 100% cotton. So these are 100% cotton. This is 100% cotton. Both the backing and all of the jelly roll fabrics were pre-shrunk before I ever started to sew. This I rinsed in very hot water and then mostly air dried, but in our climate where it's so humid, it could take a week to dry, and by then things start to smell musty. So once it was about halfway dry, it took about 24 hours, I put it in the dryer on low heat, and it actually, instead of removing the fluff, it actually increased the loft a little bit. Not sure if that's a good thing, but it does mean that it's going to be okay. It doesn't have the chemicals, and it's clean. This didn't wrinkle, surprisingly enough, at least not enough to matter, but these cotton pieces do. So I pressed those, and now what I'm doing, traditionally you would baste by hand, but I decided that I would go ahead and use a trick someone showed me, I don't know how many decades ago, and I'm starting the basting with safety pins because they're quick, they're easily repositioned if I need them to be moved somewhere. I started in the center, moved to the edges. It's a little bit like tightening down nuts around a surface. Like if you're tightening bicycle spokes, you don't do them all the way around in order. You kind of go back and forth. On my drum heads, you kind of go back and forth. And the reason is I'm making sure that I have a little bit of batting sticking out the edges. I know I have way more of the backing than I need going around the edges. And that's just for my own comfort. If I were trying to make this perfect right now, I wouldn't be pinning on an ironing board. I'd have a nice big table, but I don't have a table available right now. The reason I say that is I can tell this is not going to be straight of grain on the back. Again, if this were something that needed to last forever, if I were making it for money, I would be changing things right now. In fact, how badly is that going to warp in the wash and such over the decades? I'm going to guess not very much, because this is actually going to be quilted. I'm not doing a tied quilt. I'm actually going to quilt, maybe not along every line, but certainly I'm going to quilt maybe squares, because I want this to stay put, and that will help the backing or the batting to stay in place. Even though it's on a Pellin interfacing, if it detaches from that, I want it to pretty much stay where it is. So won't be the tight quilting that you would see on something at the county fair, but it'll be more than just a tied quilt. All right, so that's what I'm doing right now, and we'll be back. All right, good morning. I had some time. I decided to stop. I was really tired when I was talking about pinning this. And I had some time to think. And I thought, it only takes 5 minutes or less. I'm going to go ahead and unpin it. pin it back correctly so that things are more straight of grain. They won't be perfect, but it'll be good enough. And then I'll be back. Okay, time for some discussions. I have a very decent, the Razer Kaio Pro, whatever that means, camera that I use with my computer, but my computer is pretty old. It's more than 10 years old. I bought it used, but it's not always connecting. So the quality, you may be noticing the quality of videography is changing back and forth. That's because sometimes it's connecting with the camera that I prefer, and sometimes it's having to use the old one on this very old monitor. So here's what's going on. I pinned it. I tried really hard to get them even, and it still isn't quite even. I'm going to call it good enough. It's pinned front and back, and now I'll just hand baste large big basting stitches across now that it's held in place. Once that's done, I'll take the safety pins out, and I'm going to try machine quilting by just lowering the feed dogs on my sewing machine. I'll try a test patch first. In fact, you might notice this isn't actually quilted. I just pieced, but I never actually finished quilting. I might use this as a test patch to just see how it goes when I try quilting without the feed dogs. If that doesn't go well on this, which is, just for me, then I'll go back, put the feed dogs in, and just run some straight quilting seams, nice square patterns, or probably square is better than diamonds. Thing about quilting is it is a really old craft. You can do it as an art form, high art, absolutely gorgeous. I've got friends who do. But although I want it to look good and I want it to be decent, here are some things that aren't going to happen. I was planning on using this as the border fabric. I have enough of it, but the blues don't quite work. See? Just not quite. There's something off about it. So I'm not going to use that after all. Instead, I've got plenty of white. I think I'm just going to bind this with white. But as I get over towards this edge, it doesn't come out very far, so I'll have to bind it pretty close to the edge, which I can do. And the other thing is, I'm not sure if you can tell, For some reason, when I was piecing this corner's square, that corner, this corner is not quite square. This runs in a little bit. So I'll have to make the border on this side a little bit wider, I think. Which, again, I can do. But every one of these minor adjustments adds up, and eventually you end up with something that, you know, it's definitely going to look like it was homemade with love. So I'll be back once I have some hand basting done and do this, hopefully on camera. Hey everybody, my voice is going. You can probably tell that the decor has changed a little bit. I was recording before in the middle of May. It is now the end of June. Various reasons. The end of the school year is always difficult. You can tell I look a little disheveled right now because I'm tired. This end of school year was more difficult than any other school year I've ever taught. Partly because of the nature of trying to give grades across 6 grade levels to students I had not ever met in person, except for 1 or 2 that I had had as 3rd graders before. Partly because of COVID finally hit my family and hit it hard. Partly because I was just tired. So I had to take a little break for a while, focus on my students, get them through the school year. And then I picked up the quilting. But I had a self-imposed deadline of Father's Day because I really wanted to push myself and be done so that I could move on. And I met that deadline, but I wasn't able to film because my sewing machine, I've got a nice big desk in my studio. I'll cut in some pictures and such for you once I figure out how to do that piece. Where I didn't have a camera that was easy to get to. I did shoot a little bit with my cell phone, and I'll tag those into this video too. But I wanted to explain a couple of things. Number one, I did not end up quilting that little hot pad that I had made with my 3rd graders. I just wanted something bigger to work with. And I did some reading. My particular sewing machine, you don't have to drop the feed dogs. And sure enough, I don't know if you can see, but I was able to freehand or free quilt a nice smooth curve. It worked out beautifully. It looked nice. And then I turned it over. And I don't know if you can see, there are loops on the back side. Well, that's a tension issue. Not my personal tension, although there was quite a bit of that in the room too, but it's something to do with this particular machine. And I fiddled with it, and I fiddled with it. And I ran test after test. There are all kinds of stitching lines that I pulled out so that I'd have space to stitch again. And finally, I thought I had it fixed. I quilted, went along, most of the quilt, got it attached nicely to the backing, turned it over, and just about had a cow. There were loops all through it. I hadn't managed to fix the problem. Well, because I had set the stitches fairly small, ripping them all out was not going to be fun or time-consuming, and I decided it wasn't necessary. Again, that quilt is just to keep somebody warm. It didn't have to be perfect, didn't even have to be beautiful, but I didn't want a bunch of loops on the back side of the quilt. So I went to Joann Fabrics by myself. Well, my husband drove us there because we were running shopping errands, but I went into the store by myself. It was the first time that I've been in a store by myself shopping since everything shut down in my state back in March of 2020. So that was a big deal. And I found beautiful fabric. to go on the back of my red, white, and blue quilt. A red, white, and blue with white stars on the blue stripes. It's just a print, but it's a pretty print. And it is 100% cotton. And I bought enough that I could just put this on the back of the quilt that I had already quilted. And I measured very carefully. After washing this the way I always do to pre-shrink as much as it's going to shrink and get any extra dye out, I set the quilt on top. By that time I had trimmed it up so it was square, so a little smaller than you saw it in the previous videos. And I just started quilting again. Didn't re-quilt over any of the lines I'd already done in the one direction. Not sure what my neighbor's doing, but there you go. Didn't have to requilt those. They were solid. They just were ugly on the back. So I requilted along new lines. It actually looks really nice. I managed to get a very decent pattern on the back of the quilt by skipping over the lines that I hadn't yet quilted for the front. Then I just did a self-binding and it turned out pretty well. Still had a few loops on the back. I just kind of snipped the ones that were really big and left the rest, knowing that it wasn't going to be a big deal. And I was done. It took me until noon on Father's Day, but I was done, which meant I could set it aside and spend the rest of Father's Day with my long-suffering spouse, who is wonderful. Long story short, it's done, but I was so focused on getting it done, I did not take a lot of video, didn't even take a lot of still pictures, but what I have, I will cut into this, and I'll put descriptions of all the fabrics that I used to the best of my knowledge. I'll include the names of the fabrics and all of that. And if it helps you, great. And if you've made it this far, you're probably more patient than I am. And let me know what you think. And I am absolutely open to extra advice on what I can do better in the future. Now, please know I'm going to be publishing this beginning of July of 2021. So if you're viewing this in December or June of 2022, just know I've probably figured some of those bugs out already. So maybe if you have helpful comments, see what's already been written. And I hope your family's doing okay. See you next time.